The horse smelled it before I did. She stopped dead, right at the edge of the cottonwoods, and her ears went flat, like someone had pressed them down with a thumb. I didn't kick her. You don't kick a horse that stops like that. You listen. I'd been riding since before sunup. 15 hours in the saddle, maybe more, trailing a string of stolen cattle that turned out to belong to a man who was already dead. So I was tired in the way that gets under your skin, not just in your legs. The kind of tired where you start doing stupid things, like following a creek north into territory you've got no business being in. The creek was called Rio Cobre by the old maps. The Apache didn't call it anything, far as I knew. They didn't name water. They just knew where it was. I pulled Nola, that was the horse. I pulled her back into the shade of a salt cedar and sat still. That's when I heard them. Voices. Not loud. Low and warm, like something between talking and singing. The way women sound when they're not thinking about being heard. And then I heard the water moving differently. The way it moves when someone's in it. Should have turned around. I know that. I've known it every time I've told this story, and I still sit here and say, I should have turned around. But the trail back was 4 hours in the dark with no moon, and Nola needed water, and I told myself that's why I stayed. That's the lie I told myself. The truth is I was curious. The creek, I came around. The bend slow, hands loose, not on the rifle. That part was deliberate. If you come around a bend with your hand on a rifle, you deserve whatever happens next. There were 3 of them. 2 were young, maybe 17, maybe 20. I'm bad with ages. And 1 was older, maybe 40, with silver threaded through her hair, like someone had sewn it in with care. They were bathing in a wide, shallow pool where the creek bent south, and the cottonwood leaves were dropping gold into the water around them. And I will tell you, honestly, that the whole thing looked like something a painter would be embarrassed to paint, because no one would believe it. I stopped Nola. They saw me. And here's the thing nobody believes when I tell this. None of them screamed. The older woman looked at me the way you look at something that needs to be assessed. Not afraid, assessing. Like she was deciding what category I belonged in. The 2 younger ones moved closer to her, not running, just closing ranks, the way people do when they trust the person they're moving toward. I held up one hand, palm out. I said, in the worst, most embarrassing Apache I have ever spoken in my life. And I've spoken some bad Apache. I said something that was supposed to mean I mean no harm. What I actually said, I found out later, was something closer to I am not a useful person. The older woman blinked. Then she said something to the younger 2, and one of them, the taller one, with a red cloth tied at her wrist, she laughed, just briefly. But she laughed, the woman. Part 1. The older woman's name was Da-e-Sa. I learned that later. What she told me to do, in English that was cleaner and more precise than mine, was to go downstream, water my horse, and stay there until she called for me. I did exactly that. I sat downstream for about 20 minutes, listening to the creek and watching Nola drink, and I thought about how strange it is that your whole life can hinge on whether you go left or right at a fork in a trail. She came down to me, barefoot, dressed, with her hair still wet. She sat on a flat rock across the creek from me and looked at me for a long time without saying anything. I did not fill the silence. That's something you learn. Some silences are being used for something, and you shouldn't interrupt them. Finally, she said, "Where are you going?" I told her I'd been trailing cattle and lost the trail 2 days back. She said, "That's not where you're going. That's where you've been." And I didn't have an answer for that, because she was right. Who I was. My name is Caleb Roos. I was 31 years old that September. I'd been drifting for about 4 years at that point, since the war, since my brother died at a river crossing in a skirmish that nobody remembers now, and that didn't mean anything, even when it happened. I'm not going to go into all of that. But I will tell you that by the time I found that creek, I'd gotten very good at going somewhere without going anywhere. Moving without arriving, working without caring about the work. Most men who drift like that are running from something. I wasn't running. I just didn't know what direction toward felt like anymore. Da-e-sa seemed to understand this about me faster than I understood it about myself. Dusk. The fire. She did not invite me to their camp, not that first night. But she told me I could make a fire on the south bank, and that I was not to come across the water until morning. I agreed to that. There was a girl, the one who'd laughed. She came to the water's edge at some point in the evening and set something on a rock near the bank. Dried meat and a piece of flatbread. She didn't look at me when she did it, or she tried not to. But she was young and couldn't quite hold the pretense, and I caught the edge of a glance before she turned back. I ate every bite of it. Sometime in the night, the coyotes started up, 3 or 4 of them close, and Nola went restless. I sat up and talked to her low until she settled, the way you do, not because the words matter, but because the sound does. Across the water, I could see the shape of their fire through the cottonwoods. I thought about my brother. I thought about how he used to say there are 2 kinds of men in the world. Men who make a place more dangerous, and men who make it more still. He always wanted to be the second kind, and mostly was, until he wasn't anymore. I fell asleep sitting up against a salt cedar thinking I'd like to be more still. Morning. The shift. I woke up to somebody crouching about 3 feet from my face. It was the tall girl, the one with the red cloth. She was crouched down looking at my boots with what I can only describe as professional interest. She was studying the tooling on the leather, tracing it with her eyes, but not touching. I said, "Good morning." She stood up fast and took 3 steps back, and then stopped herself, like she'd decided she wasn't going to be embarrassed about it. I said, "The man who made those boots was a German fellow in San Antonio. He did the pattern himself, every boot different." She looked at me, then at the boots, then back at me. She said, in English, "They look like water." I looked down at my own boots. I'd never thought about them like that before. "Yeah," I said, "I think you're right." Her name was Nalin. She was 18. Her mother was the other young woman, who was 22 and very serious, and watched me constantly from a careful distance with an expression that said she had not fully decided yet whether I was going to be a problem. Isa, the weight of her, the older woman, came to me after breakfast. She sat where she'd sat the evening before, on the flat rock, and she told me, not asked, that I would stay for 2 more days because she needed to move east, and the route was not safe for 3 women alone. I said I would do that. I almost asked why she trusted me, but I thought about it for a second and realized that was a stupid question. She didn't trust me. She had assessed me and decided I was less of a risk than what was on the road east. That's different from trust. That's math. But she was willing to do the math, and that meant something. Over those 2 days, I learned things about Da-e-sa that pieced together slowly, the way you do when someone gives you information in small amounts, not because they're being secretive, but because they assume you're paying attention. Her husband had died 3 years before, a sickness that moved through their band fast and left gaps. Her son was grown and living near the Mescalero. She and Nalin's mother and Nalin had been to visit a trader who owed them debts, and they were going home. She told me this without emotion, the way you'd tell someone the route. Not cold, just clear, like she'd already done the grief, and this was just the information that remained. I told her my brother had died in the war. She nodded, like that was something she understood. She said, "What do you do with it?" I said I didn't understand the question. She said, "The missing. What do you do with it when you ride?" And I didn't have an answer, and I sat with that for a long time. The road east. Day 1. We rode out together on the 3rd morning. Me and Nola in front, the 3 women behind on 2 horses. Nalin and her mother sharing, which meant the mother's horse moved slower, and Nalin spent the whole morning looking sideways at the landscape like she was cataloging it. Da-e-sa rode beside me. She talked when she felt like talking and didn't when she didn't, which I found deeply comfortable. Most people fill silence because silence makes them nervous. She used it like a tool. Around midday, she pointed to a butte on the north horizon and said there was a spring on the east face. I said, "I've never been this far north." She said, "I know. You ride like someone who doesn't know where water is." I wasn't sure if that was an insult. I decided it wasn't. The spring was exactly where she said. The trouble. The trouble came on the second afternoon. 4 riders, coming from the south, moving too fast and steering toward us too deliberately to be coincidence. I didn't know them, but I knew the shape of what they were. The kind of men who ride toward 3 women and 1 man with that particular kind of forward, lean, like they've already decided how things are going to go. I told the 3 women to stay on the far side of a dry wash, and I rode out to meet them alone. I am not going to make this dramatic. It wasn't a gunfight. It was a conversation, the kind of conversation that's mostly about what you don't say and where your hands are. I kept mine visible. I kept my voice flat. I told them we were traveling east, that the women were my family, and that the road was long, and I had no interest in making it longer. The man in front, I could tell from his face he was trying to decide if I was worth the trouble. I just held still. This is the thing nobody tells you about being still. It's not passive. It takes more effort than moving. You have to choose it over and over every second someone's staring at you. They turned south. I watched them for a while. Then I went back across the wash. Da'asa was watching my face when I rode back. She said, "You've done that before." I said, "Once or twice." Nalan was watching me too. Different from before. She had the look of someone who's adjusting a category. Night 2, the real conversation. We made camp in a canyon where the walls blocked the wind. Nalan's mother made a fire that burned clean and low, almost visible, from more than 30 yards. I noticed that. I didn't comment on it. After the women slept, Da'asa sat by the fire and I sat across from her, and she said, "You didn't answer my question." I knew which one. I said, "I carry it in my chest, like a stone, and I've gotten so used to the weight that I think I'd fall forward without it." She looked at the fire. She said, "My husband was like that for me. After he died, I kept waking up on his side of the bed looking for the weight of him." I said I was sorry. She said, "Don't be. It taught me that the body remembers love even when the mind is trying to move on. That's not a bad thing." I thought about that for a long time. I said, "I don't know what direction toward feels like anymore." She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Toward feels like something pulling, not pushing. You'll know it when you stop being able to go the other way." Day 3, arrival. We reached the edge of their territory on the afternoon of the 3rd day. There was a line of hills. I wouldn't have known meant anything, but I could tell by the way Da'asa's shoulders dropped that we were somewhere she recognized. Nalan's mother stopped her horse and said something I didn't understand, but she looked at me when she said it. And the look was not hostile. It was something like acknowledgement, like when you revise an opinion and you're willing to let the person know without making a speech about it. Nalan rode up beside me. She said, "What will you do now?" I said I wasn't sure. She said, "You should find out. You're good at going somewhere. You should try going to a place." I looked at her. She was 18 years old and had more directness than most men I'd ridden with for years. I said, "When did you get so wise?" She said, "I learned it from her." And she pointed at Da'asa, who was already riding ahead toward the hills. The goodbye. And what stayed Da'asa turned her horse before the hills and came back to where I'd stopped. She reached into the bag across her lap and held something out to me. It was a small piece of turquoise, rough cut, on a thin strip of leather. "The kind of thing you wear or carry," she said, "for keeping the road safe." I said, "I didn't do much." She said, "You were still when you needed to be still. That's not easy for men like you." I took it. She held my gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Not long enough to be uncomfortable. Just long enough to mean something. Then she turned her horse and rode toward the hills, and Nalan and her mother followed. And I sat on Nola, in the silence of a canyon in the middle of nowhere, and watched them until the hills folded them away. I held the turquoise in my hand. I thought about what she'd said. Toward feels like something pulling. And I realized, sitting there, that for the first time in 4 years, I felt something that was not a push. Something I couldn't name yet. Just a direction. I turned Nola east. Not because I knew what was there. Just because I couldn't go the other way anymore.